1 2 1 2. One two one two, 1 2 1 2.
No problem. Aye.
Testing, testing, testing. Is that okay? Sounds. Yeah, I just thought my voice is quite loud anyway. So.
Is it?
Yeah.
He was booming yesterday, man. He was totally booming.
Hang on, better have a look. I did email it.
Let's see. Yeah.
No, it's neither of those. It's a PowerPoint. Is it not on there? We're going to.
When did you come over?
I just got some more. I flew last night and this one. Is there a wee notepad and a pen? Is there a notepad and a pen?
You could go grab that.
Brilliant.
Do you need a pen?
Yeah, I've got one. Great.
It can't be. I checked it before I took it out. Mark, have you got that email that I sent to you with the PowerPoint
Yes,
on it? It doesn't
yes.
seem to be on the stick. Although I'm certain it was because I checked it.
Okay, I have to sign into my Gmail account. Okay. Okay. Give me a second. I'll get it.
If not, I've got it on my phone, so I can email it to somewhere else.
Email it to me and I'll go.
I did cover a whole range of bases just in case. Just a second, I'll just go in.
Okay, send it to me. I'll go and get it now.
Okay.
Okay. What's your birth, please?
Okay.
Sorry.
Yes. D. Henry.
Just a second, I just need to find it. SSRG presentation.
Genius.
That's it.
Thank you.
That's it.
I've got none in this one. I've got none in this
So
one.
if I
No. Oh, aye.
forward,
It's even better.
yeah, forward.
Genius.
That's it.
Thank you.
D.
That's 20 quid and a wee book.
Oh, right, that's it.
It's RaptureTV.com.
Yeah,
just to check.
it was, yeah. There we go.
Brilliant. I've just found, well, thank you very much. The after pen. Well, that's even better. I'll keep that. This young gentleman gave me a Hallelujah pen, so that's great.
I took an extra few of them on
Brilliant.
that thing. And David and I will be there on the 25th of September for the
Brilliant.
next AFTA one.
See you there.
Yeah. Yay.
It's nice to have a wee base. It's nice to have a base. Well,
Do you plan to stay there over the long term, or?
no, probably, yeah. The negotiations are September. And then assignment, there'll be another assignment after that, so
So you don't know where it'll be, or?
could be Sicily, could be the Far East.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure what to do. I thought, will I do a presentation? But I'm looking at, we know the audience here. These people are learning, compassionate. They've been paying attention for a long time.
All right.
And I'm thinking, I'm going free flow. I just want questions and Q&A. Like, right from the start, I'm thinking, Luis is going to do a presentation. We've already checked, looked at some of the stuff. We're on the same page. Pro renewables, but skeptical of how
Do you
it's
want
going to be used.
to? Sorry, just tell them what you're telling me.
Yeah. Oh yeah, because we're pretty much on the same page here. We've looked at some of your stuff. So pro renewables, but sceptical about how it's been abused.
Yeah, that's exactly what mine.
Since you're doing a PowerPoint, I'm going more free flow. So, would you want to do this? Because I'm totally flexible. Do you want to go up and present to them the situation, or do you want me to talk about oil generally?
Why don't you let him go first?
Yeah.
And then once he's done, then
I'll take some notes. We can discuss the ball.
pick up on some points and then open it up for Q&A. You know,
Very as quickly as possible. There's a lot of people here who know a lot about what's going on. You know,
Okay.
These guys have been paying attention.
and we've got plenty of time. We've got 2.5 hours. So,
Brilliant.
you know, it's longer than most. You know,
Yeah, I mean,
I
I've
think it's as long as one.
30, 35 minutes with mine.
Perfect.
So, do you want me to go into bat first?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's
And then
absolutely fine.
Phil can do
There will be no curveballs. There will be no curveballs.
Oh, no, I'm absolutely fine.
Right, mute. That's the ball.
David's just superhuman. He's going back and forth doing the video and you guys are growing.
What's on next door?
Yeah, it's about 3/4.
Oh, that's fascinating.
If we can get the first slide loaded up, I'll just make sure the pointer works properly.
It's up to David.
Aye. Nothing like technology letting you down when you're part way in.
I think when you're down there, I'll probably just sit down in the audience and watch
Yeah,
the
just
presentation.
whatever.
So there's nothing in the way of the screen.
Yeah, whatever works. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or in the end. Yeah.
Okay. You know, coffee's here right now.
Yeah, a bit of caffeine to boost the energy.
apparently civilization didn't really kick in until we get natural caffeine from plants. We get better organised when we start to take caffeine. What?
I can't function without a cup of coffee in the morning.
Aye, magic, man.
So is your background oil and gas?
Yeah, contracts manager with BP, Shell, Statoil,
Oh, right.
Qatar Petroleum. Did carbon capture and storage as well.
Oh, I did that as well.
Let's talk CCS. I was on Lord Oxborough's co-author of the carbon capture and storage. In fact, I should talk about that one since
Well, I was the project director for SSRG's carbon capture project, which was the JV with Shell. You won that?
Yeah, I was Shell's contracts manager on that.
All right.
At the early stages, when we switched it from Longana to, because coal-fired was when we put up to St Fergus.
Yeah. I was the project director for that job.
Brilliant. Well, I was in Shell headquarters doing all the
Right,
contract
yeah,
stuff.
Yeah. So I dealt with, who was my
So when
opposite
they
number
said
at
it-
Shell?
I,
I'm trying to remember. I'm not good with names.
a wee guy, black hair, my manager, our project manager, and the British government come up to sign the contract, and I had my yes lanyard on. And it was a security threat, apparently. We'll talk about that. I should talk about that one. We'll definitely bring that one up.
No, I remember when the government pulled the plug on it, the day of the budget, the day before the budget, the government rang me and said that the budget speech wasn't going to include it. And I had to go and get the chief exec out of the meeting, and I was so upset and so angry, I could virtually hardly speak to him. It was like, the government's pulled the bloody plug on our project. But it was a great project, using
was.
GoldenEye.
Yep,
Yeah, no, it was a brilliant project.
that's bizarre.
I'm trying to think of the chap's name. I'm absolutely hopeless with names. I can picture his face as well. A really, really good guy. I really enjoyed working with him. His name escapes me.
This is called the paper I was involved in because of this was Lord Oxborough's. So there it's there. So it was 2016. Lord Oxborough, Aldous himself,
Yeah.
and some of the top,
2016.
Stuart Hazeldine, Professor of CCS at Edinburgh,
Right.
So-
Yeah, I remember. Yeah, I remember.
Templeton, White, and Worthington. She's a lord, they don't really call them. These were some of the top experts, and we've been surprised. If you'd have been,
Right.
thing is, we're from the front end actually doing the job. These guys were the theorists and the guys.
basis of the paper that I'm using.
Ah, nice.
But yeah,
That makes sense.
corporate habits die hard, I guess.
1, 2, 1, 2. Give me a sec. I'll see if I can find someone. Right. We're on. Are we on? We are. Okay, we're on. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning. It's nice and sunny. This is hopefully the first perfect presentation we've done so far. The technology is now working, certainly in this hall. We're going to leave you in the capable hands of Mark, who's the fellow director of SSRG. Yesterday, as a little bit of snippet, one of our guests said, what's missing for the Yes movement is an organisation that helps bring people together. And I'm sitting there going, yeah, but isn't that what we're doing? So we're not missing. But indeed, there is a lot of work that's being done by lots of different groups. And SSRG is a think tank, so all we do is basically lie around thinking. Thank you so much. However, SSRG is not for profit, so we don't make any money out of here. Oh, somebody moving the mic, is that you? Oh, he keeps doing this, trying to upstage me. It'll never work. Anyway, SSRG is not for profit. The next thing that we're planning to do is go back to EFTA in Brussels. We've been there now twice. And we're also going to do an exhibition later in the year at the same time in the European Parliament, just to remind them all that Scotland exists and that we could be a very helpful, independent, energy-rich. It might be, maybe my batteries are running out. Energy-rich little country just like Norway, which it turns out are very popular in Europe. So I think we'll be right at home there. But anyway, on with the show. We're currently going out on Zoom and live on YouTube, and these recordings will be made available and cut down into more manageable pieces sometime after I've had my holiday. Over to you, Mark.
Okay, we're live. All right. Okay, so welcome, everybody. It's wonderful to see so many familiar faces again. And so we are going to speak about energy policy today. We have with us Rhys Stenick, is that correct?
Stenick,
Stenick, okay, good. And Phil Boswell. Rhys will start out with his presentation. We've got a bit of extra time. This is 2.5 hours, which is the longest that we've had, so we'll have plenty of time. And then I think Phil Boswell. He's going to just pick up on some points, and then we're going to just open it up for Q&A. Phil was just remarking that this is an informed audience, and I'm sure all of you have your own ideas about energy policy in an independent Scotland, and I know that we may have some specialists in the audience as well. Who are more than welcome, of course, invited to contribute. So without further ado, Rhys, would you please begin and give us your thoughts on energy policy?
Thanks. Thanks very much, Mark, and good morning, everyone. Hopefully you can all hear me. So as the slide says, my name's Rhys Stenick, and I'm an energy advisor with Energy Scotland, which is a kind of fledgling group which seeks to advise on energy policy in Scotland. Prior to that, I had a career of over 30 years in the energy industry, in a whole range of roles covering engineering, construction, through to business development, energy strategy, and energy trading. So any strong, sustainable economy needs to have secure, affordable energy supplies. It is the bedrock of any successful nation. In recent times, we've added low carbon to this as an additional consideration to reflect the need to combat the effects of climate change. So these three considerations, energy security, cost, and carbon emissions, are often referred to as the energy trilemma. The reason for this is that the three aspects of the trilemma are all linked, and invariably this means that any policy decision to focus on one of them often results in a compromise of the other two. In my talk this morning, I'm going to cover how the energy trilemma can be viewed from Scotland's perspective and the role that green energy can play in Scotland's future. Now, I'm going to focus predominantly on electricity, as that is the current policy focus. So when Scotland and the rest of the UK was rich in oil and gas and coal, electricity supplies were both secure and relatively cheap. Carbon emissions were not a consideration at that point. But since the early 2000s, decarbonisation has received more and more prominence, with successive Westminster governments putting ever more priority on this aspect of the trilemma, culminating in the current government, for which it appears to be an almost singular focus. And we're now seeing the effect that that singular focus is having on the other two elements of the trilemma. Firstly, energy prices are going up, even without the effect of high gas prices. And secondly, we are actually far less energy secure, with a far greater percentage of our energy being imported. Scotland's electricity generation mix used to reflect the broader UK mix. And it's shown on this slide here, which is for 2023. But with the recent focus on building renewables and closing fossil-fired generation, especially coal, what we are now seeing is a shift in the energy mix from what is in Scotland to what is in England and Wales. Ireland has its own separate market. And it's important to understand this shift when considering what approach should be taken to the energy trilemma and energy policy in Scotland. So the key differences are, first of all, Scotland has a far greater amount of renewable generation than the national average when compared to our demand. So renewables are, if I can get my laser to work, predominantly wind, with also solar and hydro. Scotland already generates more than 100% of its annual demand from renewable sources, whereas the UK average is far lower at about 30%. Secondly, Scotland is a net exporter of electricity, whereas the UK is a net importer. In 2024, Scotland exported a net of almost 20 terawatt hours of electricity, worth around £1.5 billion. Now, for context, 20 terawatt hours is almost Scotland's entire national consumption. And most of that was transported into England. Thirdly, Scotland now has less backup generation than the national average. It's becoming increasingly difficult to manage keeping the lights on cold, still winter days when renewable output is very low. All of the backup gas-fired power stations are in England and Wales, apart from one, which is at Peterhead. The rush to decarbonise and close our fossil industry has had a direct effect on Scotland's energy security. And this makes Scotland much more reliant on energy imports when renewable output is low. Thirdly, Scotland is essentially only directly interconnected to England. So this shows the UK's interconnectors. There is a small interconnector to Northern Ireland, labelled Moyle, but it generally only flows towards Northern Ireland. All of the big European interconnectors deliver to and from England and Wales. And this means that Scotland is therefore more reliant on a single trading partner. Overlaid on top of all these physical differences, energy policy as you're well aware, is reserved to Westminster under the Scotland Act. And this means that Scotland cannot unilaterally implement policy decisions, whereas Westminster can. And I'm going to come back to this issue later on. So what do these features mean in terms of Scotland's potential approach to the energy trilemma? To examine this, I'm going to consider each part of the trilemma in turn, starting with the most topical one, given recent events in Spain, which is energy security. Energy security means national security. Energy security is vital for a nation to sustain itself and grow its industrial base. The energy costs can be better controlled, and negotiating positions are stronger in nations that have energy security. The ultimate in energy security could be referred to as energy sovereignty, and this is where a nation directly controls all of its own energy sources. A perceived failure of Westminster energy policy is that increasing electrical interconnection to Europe and gas import facilities is seen as energy security, when in fact it increases exposure to international prices and the willingness of supplying countries to continue to want to do business, particularly when supply chains become strained. Arguably, the current UK's energy strategy is not actually reducing global emissions either. We're simply moving emissions from one country to another, and potentially even increasing them through transport. Scotland's wealth of renewables means that Scotland is much closer to energy sovereignty than the UK as a whole. And we could adopt this as an aspiration. This would strengthen Scotland's position in a whole host of areas. The policy decision not to continue drilling for North Sea oil and gas is hindering our approach to this particular aspiration. Whilst we're still reliant on oil and gas for our energy needs, we may want to review this position. There are still some challenges to be overcome to achieve an aspiration of energy sovereignty. Scotland's energy industry, like the rest of the UK, is in private ownership. So efficient regulation of those assets is a must. And nationalisation, maybe of some parts, is a possible option to move closer to actual sovereignty. The lack of backup generation in Scotland needs to be addressed, as Scotland is currently quite exposed. There are many battery storage projects being supported, but batteries typically only last a couple of hours, and still spells can last for days. For backup generation that can last for days, another gas-fired power station, or possibly even two, should be considered until greener options become available. A large thermal power plant can also provide grid support, such as reactive power and system inertia, that renewables cannot. And this was reported as a major weakness which led to the collapse of the Spanish grid very recently. Scotland may want to consider continuing oil and gas exploration to improve energy security while we are still reliant on fossil fuels, and also to generate revenue to help fund the transition to a greener economy at a pace that does not compromise our energy security or our energy affordability. And finally, of course, all these measures can't be implemented unilaterally at the moment, without Scotland having ownership of its own energy policy. And this means either full independence or at least having energy policy devolved is an absolute imperative. The second point on the trilemma is price. The UK has some of the highest industrial electricity prices in the developed world, and the highest in Europe and the G7. You can see them on this slide here. This is significantly hampering not only our continued investment in green technologies, but our very way of life, our homes, our industry, and our prosperity as a nation. Now, I regularly get asked the question, why is this? So I thought I would address it here. There are essentially two reasons why our prices are so high. The first one is the structure of the energy market. Scotland operates within a single Great Britain wholesale market. Northern Ireland isn't part of it. It's part of an all-island market. So all generators in GB have to sell into this market, and all suppliers buy out of it. Now, the market was designed when gas and coal were the major electricity generators. And the market was effectively used to select the most efficient generating plants. And it was very, very good at it. But since then, all the coal-fired power stations have been closed, leaving the gas generators to compete with each other. A key feature of the wholesale market is it's what we call a cleared price market. And this means that the most expensive generator that's needed to satisfy demand sets the price that every generator receives. So all generators will receive this high price, even if their actual costs are well below it. With gas prices being high, and gas generation still needed to meet demand on top of renewables and nuclear and so on, this means that gas generation is still setting the price in GB virtually 100% of the time, even though they contribute only around 30% of the generated volume. Now, Britain is interconnected to Europe, and the markets are therefore linked. So we all have the same issue with high gas prices. But in GB, gas sets the price much more often than it does in countries in Europe, like Germany and Spain. With gas generators setting the price, any generator with a fixed operating cost, like renewables and nuclear, will make more and more profit as the gas prices go up. And we, the consumers, are paying for that. Currently, the wholesale price accounts for about 45% of our bills, the largest component of the bill by far. If the wholesale price reflected the actual cost of each generator and not the cost of the most expensive one, domestic, commercial, and industrial energy bills would be potentially significantly reduced. The more renewable generation that comes on the system, the less fit for purpose this market structure is, and the more pressing the need for a better structure that's more reflective of the actual cost of generating our electricity. Now, some steps have been taken to address this issue by moving newer renewables onto fixed price contracts, but they are still relatively small in number at the moment and have little effect on consumer prices. There's also a proposal to split Great Britain into several separate markets, at least one of which will be in Scotland. And this has the potential to reduce power prices in Scotland. But the downside of this is that each market is a copy of the current one and brings with it all the current weaknesses and issues. The second point is that, contrary to the mantra of successive Westminster governments, net zero is actually not cheap. The main focus for renewable generation is wind in the top left, which is currently cheaper than gas generation. but only when the wind is blowing. Solar, on the right there, is another current favourite. But this is the UK. This is the country with the 5th lowest sunlight hours of any country in the world. And solar is nowhere near as effective as it is in sunnier countries like Europe and the US. In the UK, solar only generates around 10% load factor. That's 10% of its maximum output for all the cost and space that that takes up. Compare this to almost 25% in the US. This seems a very high cost and very high visual intrusion for a very low contribution. To provide a greener form of backup generation, batteries are being deployed in large numbers across the country. A typical one is shown there on the bottom left. But these are both expensive and they don't give power for very long. When the wind is not blowing and the sun is not shining for longer periods of time, gas-fired generation is still required. So, unlike coal, the government cannot afford to shut all the gas plants down because they are still needed, and therefore they have to carry on funding them. All of these sources of electricity generation are remunerated largely through the wholesale market. And as I mentioned, this constitutes 45% of our bill. Though the wholesale market is clearly not fit for purpose, as I just mentioned, there is still a lot of cost to be remunerated. So the chances of wholesale prices reducing dramatically are fairly small. The CEO of British Gas recently made this point in the press. The next issue is that most of the renewable generation is in Scotland, far away from where the electricity is actually needed. So huge grid reinforcement and grid extension is needed. A typical bit is shown on the bottom right here. You'll be aware of the Bewley-Denny transmission line, which is now having to be upgraded. There are 2 new undersea interconnectors under construction between Scotland and England, along with a whole host of overground power lines right across the UK. And this is why transmission costs now constitute about 20% of our bill. It is the next biggest cost. A cost that is very rarely quoted by politicians when they claim that renewable energy is cheap. In addition to the cost of generating and transporting electricity, UK consumers are also paying the cost of a whole host of Westminster government green policies, such as smart meters, heat pumps, insulation, and so the list goes on. These account for about another 12% of our bill. So don't be fooled. Net zero costs money, and lots of it. UK energy policy also dictates that these energy-related costs are all passed through to the consumer. None of it is funded from general taxation. So Britain has market prices set by expensive gas generation, even when little gas generation is needed. There are considerable extra costs being borne that are not in any way subsidised, unlike, for example, in France. And this is why Britain has the highest electricity prices in Europe. So for energy prices in Britain to be affordable, one of 3 things needs to happen. Firstly, the gas price must fall. But we have no control over that. So this is merely hope. It's not a strategy. Secondly, consumer prices need to be discounted. But given the current financial climate, this seems pretty unlikely. So thirdly, we need to restructure our energy market to be more cost reflective. There seems to be little appetite in Westminster for such a change, and unfortunately, Scotland cannot currently do it unilaterally. So once again, having energy policy devolved is an absolute imperative. And the third point of the energy trilemma is decarbonisation. The Scottish Government most recently enacted the Climate Change Act in 2024, which committed Scotland to net zero carbon emissions by 2045. Successive Westminster governments have set ever more ambitious carbon reduction targets, culminating with the current Labour government's commitment to net zero by 2030, less than 5 years away. Now, Scotland is uniquely placed to support decarbonisation, but we also want to be prosperous as a nation with successful industries and good job prospects. So therefore, decarbonisation must be a means to an end and not an end in itself, as it often appears to be at the moment. Whatever decarbonisation target is adopted, there are two key things we must ensure happen during the transition away from a fossil-fueled industry. These are the development of new clean power projects must be net value adding for Scotland and not net value reducing. And secondly, the transition of jobs and industry must be managed so that employment and GDP are constantly improved and not adversely affected. And I think in both of these areas, there are questions to be asked. On the first point, Scotland has probably the greatest renewable energy resources in Europe. But whereas there is intrinsic value in gas and oil, wind and water are free. It is the technology that harnesses wind and water to turn it into electricity that creates the value. And unfortunately, very little of that is made in Scotland. In a typical wind farm, around 85% of the cost of the wind farm is in the technology, and all of that is imported. Most of the remaining cost is spent during construction on roads, concrete bases, and so on. There is very little ongoing operation and maintenance costs that can benefit Scotland. Most of this goes back to the technology providers under the terms of their warranties. The benefit to Scotland of battery farms is even more skewed, with almost the whole battery system being imported, normally from China, where it's constructed using fossil fuels and then shipped at additional environmental cost to Britain. Virtually no value at all is created within Scotland. The current Westminster recommendation is that developers should offer local communities £5,000 per megawatt of capacity for the life of the project as a community benefit. But I have heard many times feedback that that rarely happens. As I've mentioned before, Scotland does not have control of energy policy. So awarding contracts, licensing new generators, and so on rests with Westminster. However, Scotland does have control of the planning process, and hence the Scottish Parliament could use this leverage to steer what gets built, where, and under what conditions. Whether this negotiating power is actually being utilised to the full is a question for Holyrood, and we should be asking them that question. On my second point, the speed of transition away from fossil fuels and into clean energy must be managed very, very carefully. Creating new industries and jobs is a far slower process than closing existing industries, and also erecting wind turbines. The net zero by 2030 target runs the risk of fossil fuel-based industries being shut well before new industries and infrastructure to support green energy is even in place. Now, I'm originally from the northwest of England, and I witnessed firsthand the deindustrialisation without consideration of what, if anything, would replace it. So we have form when it comes to shooting ourselves in the foot like this. We're already seeing evidence of this, with closures of oil and gas projects, Port Talbot and the refinery at Grangemouth. Our grid reinforcement, reserve generation capacity, and the development of green industries such as heat pumps lags well behind the speed industry is being closed and wind turbines are being thrown up. Decarbonisation is well within reach for Scotland, but doing so whilst preserving Scotland's industrial strength and employment prospects represents a clear challenge that we must address. So in covering the trilemma, I've mentioned industry many times. Scotland has a long and proud industrial heritage, and it must ensure it nurtures a proud green industrial heritage. Now, I'm an engineer by profession, and I'm a strong believer that strong nations are built on strong industry. In fact, this aspect is so crucial that I and my colleagues at Energy Scotland often refer to the energy quadrilemma, with the fourth key focus being industrial strategy. There are many industrial applications to generate and use green energy. And here's just a selection of them. Hydropower has been around for decades, and wind and solar are becoming well established. But wave and tidal, which is up there, and the top left, these are relatively new, and they're still under development, with several projects being developed within Scotland. Hydrogen, the next one there, has many potential uses that are only just being explored, where excess wind power can be used to generate hydrogen that can be used for heat or for transport. There's a pilot project running in Aberdeen. Carbon capture and storage, which is, apologies. That one there. This is a potential way forward to enable processes that must burn fossil fuel to do so without releasing the emissions to atmosphere. Scotland, again, has been instrumental in the development of carbon capture projects, but thus far the government has failed to fully support them. The use of green energy in generating heat using heat pumps, over here, it has been promoted by successive Westminster governments, but is being hampered by high electricity prices and the relatively high upfront cost of installing them. District heating schemes, one's shown here, are a more efficient way of managing heat, as there are economies of scale, but uptake of these schemes has been slow, again largely due to high electricity prices and an unwillingness of consumers to switch from gas boilers. Whilst wind energy is relatively cheap, we are still some way from maximising its value. Having already built more wind turbines than our grid can cope with, we're facing a situation where we have more power than we can manage when it's windy and not enough when it's not windy. Storage and other innovative ways of smoothing out this feast and famine problem are in development. Batteries are the obvious starting point, but as I mentioned, they have their limitations, and almost no value stays in Scotland. Storage through water, as a pumped storage scheme here, air, or as heat, are all in development within Scotland. More intelligent systems in the home can manage demand to better fit what is available, using more when we have a surplus and reducing demand when there is less. All of these are opportunities for Scottish industry. So the last topic I want to cover is governance, one which you'll be very familiar with, I'm sure. I've mentioned several times that Scotland may wish to manage its energy industry quite differently to the way Westminster is imposing us to do. I'm going to finish by looking at ways in which this could be done. Energy policy is currently reserved to Westminster under the Scotland Act 1998. So to get full power over energy, either full independence is needed, or getting energy policy devolved through negotiation, perhaps using planning powers as leverage, or through other diplomatic means. If the Scotland Act is examined in detail, though, there are several activities that Scotland can already undertake within the Act. For example, the Scotland Act refers to electricity. It does not refer to energy. So the development of a national heat industry could be done within the ownership of the Scottish state without breaching the Act. A national heat company or companies could be established either through central or local authority ownership to generate and distribute heat and further develop district heating networks. There are very successful models for this already operating in Scandinavia. Within electricity, whilst the Scottish Government cannot implement its own national market, it can develop specific applications. For example, community energy schemes can be developed by local authorities, communities or housing associations. Local authorities could develop their own flexibility, such as storage, or backup, such as even a gas turbine, to help manage local grids. Other alternatives to local authority ownership could be mutuals or cooperatives, where the people of Scotland can hold the shares in a Scottish energy company, which would then develop local energy networks, heating schemes, and so on, and reinvest the profits in local communities. If the Scottish Government wanted to develop energy infrastructure out with Westminster's energy policy, there are actually a number of ways in which it can be done. And pursuing some or all of these areas should be actively encouraged. Remember, of course, that planning consent is wholly within the Scottish Government's remit and should be used judiciously to only allow energy development in Scotland that is genuinely in the interests of the people of Scotland. And I'm not convinced this is always the case. So in summary, Scotland has huge riches in clean energy potential, but we must be wise in how that fits with other objectives of secure, affordable energy, a thriving industrial base, and a prosperous nation. Oil and gas have huge value, and we are still dependent on them, yet we have stopped drilling for new fields, opting instead to import £25 billion worth of oil and gas per year from Norway, who have extracted it from the very same seabed that we share with them. To pursue an almost evangelical green agenda, we are building huge numbers of wind farms, sourced almost entirely from abroad. We are supporting them with batteries and solar panels, all imported almost entirely from China, where they've been manufactured using coal-fired generation and shipped to Britain at an additional environmental cost to the world. And we are spending billions of pounds on new grid to allow all the power from that foreign investment to be transported out of Scotland and into England where it's needed. That power is then traded in a market that uses expensive gas prices to dictate the price for everything we buy, even though only 30% of it is actually generated from gas. The UK government tells us that our energy is secure, but 40% of it is now imported from as far afield as the USA and Qatar. GB is still one market, with the same high prices and the same lack of security. even though Scotland should be in a far more secure and far less costly situation. Valuable oil and gas jobs are being lost, offshore and in Grangemouth. Many thousands of green jobs are promised, but where are they? We can see oil rigs covered in hard-working people, but you go to a wind farm, and how many people do you see? Almost none. Energy security is an absolute must for any nation to be sustainable, and ideally what I have called energy sovereignty, not necessarily through state ownership, but certainly through state control. Scotland has the potential to achieve this, and it should be a key priority, but it is difficult to do without energy becoming a devolved matter, which is an absolute imperative. With control of energy comes the ability to have a Scottish wholesale market that better reflects the energy mix and costs in Scotland. To set energy policy to get a better balance of the four aspects of our energy quadrilemma. To stimulate industries that play to Scotland's strengths and not just rely on importing technology. And to develop new technologies of our own, to grow our green industries while continuing to support vital traditional industries throughout the transition period. But even without ownership of energy policy, there are things that Scotland can do in the interim to develop green industry. Heat is not a reserved matter, and neither is local ownership of aspects of energy development, all of which can be used to influence and complement central energy policy. As I mentioned, Scotland has the power over the planning process and could use this to negotiate a more secure, affordable, greener and prosperous future for Scotland. Scotland has enormous potential in the energy sector, but current Westminster energy policy is clearly not fit for purpose for Scotland. There are ways of changing this trajectory, but we must act, and we must act now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rhys. Now, why don't we have you give some remarks, and then we'll open it up for Q&A.
First of all, thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here amongst the good people who are fighting the fight, keeping the pilot light on for those who will eventually join as our younger children realise how much they are getting shafted as well. So let's keep it going, folks. Just a wee introduction about why I'm speaking a little on energy. Obviously, I was an MP at Westminster, obviously a bit involved still in the independence campaign, but I used to be a contracts manager for BP, Shell, Statoil in Norway, Qatar Petroleum, and I specialise in FPSOs, which is a floating platform. It's basically a wee refinery sitting on a giant vessel with pliant wave support. This is my bit, subsea umbilicals and risers, flow lines. So it's a modern way of getting oil and gas from deeper and more aggressive waters. So we know how to do this. We know how to make the money and make it count. I was also a lecturer for 4 years at Aberdeen University for the master's degree in project management, specialising in contract law and risk. So I'm now an arbitrator. I work for NATO in Europe. I do dispute resolution, primarily suing the Americans. No, come on, my friends. No, my friends, our friends, the American people are our friends, you know, and it's our governments that we've got issues with, 100%. And funny enough, when Rhys was talking about CCS, carbon capture and storage. We actually worked on the same project.
Yeah.
You were project manager. Where were you based, Rhys?
I was a project director for SSE's side of it in a joint venture with Shell.
Yeah, and I was the contracts manager for Shell. And one wee thing about this, it was carbon capture and storage was an initiative. And what we did was, there's three parts of it, and Rhys can talk in more detail about this, and we'll welcome questions on it. But what the idea was, we thought that carbon capture was absolutely critical going forward. So we said, well, the best way to do it, what you do is you would end up getting a cluster of energy, heavy energy use facilities like power generation, etc. And what we chose initially was Longannet, but of course the buggers shut that down. So we had to move it up the coast, right up to northeast, what you mentioned earlier. There's a gas power power station. So we moved it up there. And the idea was to gather the carbon capture. We had an existing facility at Shell using Goldeneye, which was a depleted reservoir. And we had the existing pipeline, and we were going to store it there. And it was by far the most economic and smartest way to do this. This was the winning initiative. The other alternative was White Rose in Yorkshire, that the government were looking for. It originally started as $1 billion with the government. When they cancelled it, as Rhys talked about, I was actually in Parliament and predicted that they were going to cancel it because their green energy deck at the time, you could tell, complete chancers. They have no interest other than making money for the corporations and the governments. That's all that matters. We don't count, which is why we're all here right now, to make sure that changes. Also, when I was at Westminster, I was involved in the generation of the government paper, lowest cost carbon decarbonisation in the UK, the critical role of carbon capture and storage, with Lord Oxburgh and Stuart Hazeldine, who was the only professor of carbon capture in the world at the time from Edinburgh University. So there's some absolutely brilliant people there, really phenomenal. I was not one of them. I would have to add. I was just in there shooting the breeze. No, I wasn't. I did my best, but these people were top level. So just going on a few things. One thing I want to comment, I quite deliberately did this because it's very thought-provoking. And we need a wee bit antagonism. We need a wee bit of stirring the pot. We need to mix it up a wee bit. I drove here today in quite a new Rolls Royce, okay? I know, not mine, I hasten to add, right? However, in a country where 1 in 4 children are in poverty, most of the trip was spent in contemplation of why the gap between rich and poor continues to get bigger, and why our children are suffering, and why the poverty is drilling our people into the ground, and what are we going to do about it? That's why the pilot light and the faith that we keep and the actions that we take are so important. So important. Don't underestimate what you do, each and every single one of you. Thank you for the pen, thank you for the book, and the donation to Prism, which we really appreciate. But what we do here is not to be underestimated. So what I want to talk about in energy is just go over some of Rhys' points, because that was an excellent presentation. I've seen some of Rhys' stuff, highly technical. Fact check it. You'll find out he's talking absolute sense, and we're on the same page. So an absolute pleasure, brilliant presentation. But rather than go back into it, I made some notes, I'll go over some points. This is all about unification. That's what we seek. Unification behind a single cause. We remember, you felt the same way as I did after the referendum in 2014. A hollowness inside. You were hollowed out. All our efforts. I have reason to believe we were cheated, but we'll come on to that another time. And when these two people who saw what happened retire or are near their deathbeds, they'll probably come out and speak. But their pensions are at threat, because who we're up against is not to be underestimated. 77th Brigade, MI5, the British establishment, they know what they're doing. They're good at what they do, unfortunately for us. They will not let us go because we are the cash cow. So unification behind a single cause. So as you know, we in Prism are promoting Liberate Scotland. And one of the other reasons I brought this Rolls Royce with me, my brothers, who sold a company for 50 million last year, right? So I came up with it, and I just want to put this out there. We have contacts, we have funding, and Liberate Scotland intends to battle the 2026 elections. And we have 5 figures saved already, and it's not small 5 figures. We're heading towards 6 figures of a battle fund that we will use to support independentistas who wish to fight as a single independentista anywhere in Scotland. And all we ask from the wider Yes group, the political parties have their own dark arts to perform, and we've seen it and we understand it. Another reason why a lot of us are no longer members of political parties, myself included. But we need to liberate. We need the unification that we saw in the Yes movement that made us an unstoppable force. And all we want is support for this initiative. And whatever, if you're not a political party, you don't need to get involved in the political side of it. If you deliver one leaflet, I will thank you for your efforts, and the people of Scotland will thank you for your efforts. Anything you can do in unity. We stop. I am highly critical, as you well know. Some of you will be well aware of the SNP and the political situation we're in at the moment. That is not to say that I will not bury the hatchet, because we have to for the benefit of us, but more importantly our children and our children's children. So that's a small plea for unification. On to what Rhys was talking about. Climate change. I am a sceptic. However, is climate change real? Yes. Are we contributing? Yes. There are 4 aspects of it: green, renewable, clean and sustainable energies. Check out Professor Patrick Moore on YouTube. For me, renewable is definable, is that technically we know what renewable energy is. Clean, we know what clean energy is. It's not exactly clean, but it's clean enough, or clean air. And sustainable. These are definable terms. Green isn't. Green is a marketing term. Green has been put out there to sell us basically higher electricity prices than we should be paying. So, and this is one of the things we talked about, knowing these audiences and knowing some of you good people. This is not your first rodeo. You've had apples off this cart before. So let's not pretend it's anything other than a battle for our children's future. Oil. 96.5% of the oil known reserves exist in the UKCS, the United Kingdom continental shelf. 96.5% of which is in Scottish waters. There's no refinery here. But even last year when we did have a refinery in Scotland, and even with all the refineries in England, 80% of the oil is exported and refined abroad. Okay? So why? Well, what we need, I worked in the most advanced refinery in UK, which was the Humber refinery for what was Phillips 66. And it makes coke, not the kind you'll find in the schemes through poverty, but the kind of coke that actually is a byproduct of the oil and gas industry and extremely valuable. What we need, Ravenscraig needed so much. Ravenscraig, that's another one. Bathgate no more, Ravenscraig, it just goes on and on. The latest one's Grangemouth. It was an older refinery. It needed a massive investment for upgrade. Losing it, there's a way we can get back quickly, because this is about greed and the free ports. If you're not supporting free ports, you're mad. The anti-free port movement, very quickly, because they're stealing again our future, and they're deleting the rights of our workers and deleting the power that is in our hands. We have to do something about that, and that's where we're interested from a litigation perspective of what we can do. We know we've got 65% of the gas. Interconnectors, something Rhys talked about. Interconnectors is direct current electricity over distance, because you don't lose as much as you would with an AC over the distance and the resistance. And it's how countries trade in electricity over distances. So if the wind is blowing in Scotland, we can sell our energy to anyone we're connected through an interconnected connector to where the wind is not blowing, because that's one of the cheapest ways of using energy. So we, as an independent state, will keep are interconnected with England, but we'll throw some other ones out there too, and we will be doing rather well. We'll make tens of billions out of it. What reserves do we have? The North Sea Transition Authority, or NSTA, say that the UK has 3.3 billion barrels, right? But it's not including what's off the west coast. In BP, I specialise in FPSOs, so how the oil developed in Great Britain, it started about 5 o'clock down about the Wash and down in the southeast of England. And what the Americans did, they came over and basically pushed a land rig into the shallows. And as technology continued, we went deeper, higher pressure, we could deal with higher sulphur. We developed the technologies, the cracker units, etc., to manage these systems and get into deeper and harsher waters. The last one I did was the replacement of the Schiehallion FPSO with the Glen Lyon, and this is Quad 204. The budget was 5 billion. My budget as subsea contracts manager was 1.7 billion. It will make 30 million a day for 35 years. That's what's at stake. That's why they won't let us go. And when I saw this in Shellhead, and you don't get this. See if you've got friends in the oil and gas industry. My wee nephew, Johnny, he works offshore. He says it's all running out. I said, is that right? What does Johnny do? Oh, he's a chef on the rigs. Is that right? Okay. Because when I was contracts manager for large projects, but as a consultant, I wasn't on the top floor. I didn't know what the break-even price or the lifting price was. The truth is being hidden, not just from you, but from even the professionals involved in the industry, unless you're trusted. I only got to know the true figures when I got to the top floor at Shell, and I will never be back, because when the carbon capture and storage, when the deal was signed with Shell, and a certain British Conservative government, backed up with the Lib Dems, came to sign the contract with us, I was not in the group photographs because I refused to take my yes lanyard off. So I will not be back. So that's the reality of it. And then what else is off the west coast? We've talked about getting to 12 o'clock. The Rockall Basin. Look at that sign out there on the Freeports Action Group, resisting it. You can see that we have 65% of the sea area of the UKCS for 8.3% of the population, 1/3 of the land mass, 66% of the fish by landings, 96.5% of the oil. We should memorise this. 65% of the gas, 90% of the fresh water for 8.3% of the population. That's what's at stake, folks. And even an ex-prime minister once said, "Oh, you can't compare Britain to Norway. They're a small country, about 5.4 million people with all this oil." Oops. That's what's at stake, friends. That's what's at stake. So, and the Rockall Basin, and bear in mind, even that bit that Tony Blair tried to steal, he tried to steal some of the Forties field. The bottom line is that it goes against UNCLOS, United Nations Constitution and the Law of the Sea, which clearly sets out how a continental shelf is divided up based on geographical ownership. It's ours. You ain't keeping it. Pricing. We should be paying, Reese is right again, we should be paying less than half of what we pay. I did a recent analysis, and Russia is paying 15%. The Russians pay 15% and we pay. Ukrainians 16%. The Americans half of what we pay. Norway sells most of its oil abroad, and it uses renewable energy. And I know Reese also supports this. Investment in research and development. Scotland, when I was working in oil and gas, we still have some of the greatest engineers and some of the greatest workforce. Everywhere you go, there are Scots working abroad in energy and engineering. Why? Because of the Scottish Enlightenment. We were educated, we put work, we had a work ethic, and we went out there. That is being deteriorated. Now the Norwegians have taken over as a centre of excellence. And I was over working in Stavanger working for Statoil. And we were looking at interconnectors. We were looking at direct power to shore and a whole bunch of stuff. That is what we need. We cannot compete with the low wages of China and India and the rising BRICS economies. We need to do what Germany did before they screwed it up by doubling their energy prices, which is focus on high-end engineering. And to do that, you need investment in Scotland for research and development, and the Brits ain't going to do that. Net zero is a nonsense. There's a guy called, you should check him out, Bjorn Longberg in the Copenhagen Consensus Centre. It's about 15% of the GDP of the EU needs to be spent every year to try and hit net zero. The GDP in the EU, that's about 3 trillion per year. No, it's madness. Is climate change real? We touched on it, yes. Do we contribute to it? Yes. But is it the problem it's purported to be or reported to be? No, in my opinion. And I could go into that. There's a PhD I started and I had to abandon because it changed what I found out. I was pro, and don't get me wrong, I'm pro what we currently do in the oil and gas industry. Minimise noxious emissions, absolutely. Stop putting plastic in the sea, common sense. Don't stop polluting. Most of the pollution comes from the developing world, and we've tried to impose all this green garbage on China and India. And here was what President Modi of India said. So let me get this straight. You've had an industrial revolution that the people of India and the people of China have not, that we seek. We want to increase the wealth of our people. You went through an industrial revolution. You created most of this mess. You've had the starters, you have the main course. Now we're joining for dessert, and you want us to split the bill? Is that what you're saying? So I'm with Modi on this one. And the bottom line is, who are we to deny a better life for our fellow human beings, the Chinese, the Indians, and any good soul on this planet? But how we do it, we should be incentivizing. Their technologies is advancing way ahead of ours now. But we can stay ahead if we invest in the right research and development, and we support these emerging nations to be more technically astute in terms of pollution. I lived in India for 3.5 years, built a bridge over the Ganges and a steel mill in some of the poorest parts of India. I have to admit, it was the thinnest I've ever been. Eating the local food, it was the shit yourself skinny diet, whether you like it or not. But reality bites, friends, reality bites. Your electricity is high because renewable energy is subsidised. And as the government, as Rhys has pointed out, and you could go into this and look into why the subsidies, amongst other things, has resulted in 2 record-level issues. The first one is the energy company profits and payments and dividends to shareholders. Record high. What's also at a record high? The price the public pays in energy bills. This needs to be reversed. And only by independence, nothing less, can we control the mechanisms, the monetary and fiscal levers to run an economy. There's about 35 of them. The current council, that is the Scottish Government, which is the big council, has a fraction of these powers and is unable to do so. We need to change that, friends. Oil and gas, there's at least 60 years for the known reserves, and that doesn't count the West Coast. And then there's, again, I'll refer to the Rockall Basin in that drawing. That outside, when I walked in the door, it hit me smack in the face. I thought, brilliant for those that are fighting the free ports. The Rockall Basin, by being Scottish, extends our waters another 200 nautical miles beyond where it was. And that means that we get the Rockall Basin. When we go into the west of the North Sea, west of Shetland, it's not just oil and gas. There's the mineral rights. There's something called fire ice, okay, and it's crystallized methane. We have to map it in oil and gas, because when we drill for oil and gas, What happens with fire ice, crystallised methane? It sits in the seabed. You can take a grabber, pick it up with the grabber, but as the pressure decreases as you lift it up and the temperature rises, it turns to a gas again and you've got nothing left. But there is a way to harness this. But how do we know it's there and why have we mapped it? Because when we do directional drilling, we drill into the seabed, sometimes 2 kilometres down, where there's fire ice pockets. If we drill through these, the increased temperature destabilises the ground that the fire ice is on because the fire ice turns to gas. And then it moves away and destabilises the drilling. We have the maps of where all the fire ice is. We know how valuable it is, so does the British government. Nobody's talking about it. I'm going to keep talking about it because that's also at stake. It's not just oil and gas, folks. It's all these other valuable mineral reserves. The price of a barrel of oil is $65. Brent crude has always been an extremely valuable mix. It's not what's used primarily for fuel, although, but it's always been one of the most valuable blends of oil and gas, of oil in the planet. Remains so and remains a benchmark for other oil and gas prices for very, very good reasons. So for me, when I look at what's been happening, I understand that we face an uphill battle and unification. It's very difficult to forgive some of the traitorous manoeuvres by those practicing the black arts, particularly in the parties that we supported, worked for, paid for, and walked as we were stabbed in the back. And I put down the current leadership of the SNP as traitors to the cause of independence. And having worked with many of them in the independence campaign, in fact, there was even one, Angus Robertson, the white paper, remember the white paper? Now, I counted out many of these people as friends because you're working together. And I thought, well, I'm going down there having managed big management teams delivering projects as Rees has. And I went down, well, this is not my game, this is politics. I was an accidental politician because we didn't think we were going to win Coatbridge, now did we? It was the safest seat in Britain. But anyway, I signed up for it. I just signed, and I'll tell you. I'd signed a contract with Saudi Aramco on the 1st of that month, 1st of May. 7th of May was the election. And you had to, when Saudi Aramco, the biggest oil and gas company in the world, come calling, you get one chance. So I signed the contract and sent it away, but I deliberately missed out some paperwork just in case, right? Just in case we were going to win it. We go and win it. And my wife, who's now my ex-wife, says, what are you doing? I said, that could be the last MP. This is the cause. This could free Scotland. I've got to do it. She says, and it was massive amounts of money, tax-free, all that kind of usual trappings. I went, no, I've got to do it. We're now divorced. Oh, well. But yeah, what are you going to do? So there's a price, and I was critical of even Joanna Cherry, who I really like and I rate very highly. And I want to put the record straight here. Joanna suffered a great deal for standing up for what was true. Do I still believe that she was misguided by trying to fight Brexit? Yes. But she did what she was told by Nicola, who I put the blame squarely on. Instead of, as Napoleon said, when your enemy's making a mistake, do not interrupt them. But by God, we made some mistakes. But I think the best thing, I'm totally up for, this is a very well-versed and educated and experienced audience. So why don't we just open up the floor now? Any questions you've got, any thoughts, any ideas on anything, but particularly how we can use the money that we can make from a smart, independent energy camp controlled by Scottish independence. That's what we want, folks. Let's do it. It's land.
We'll sit in the middle for it.
Is that sounding okay? Yeah. Well, first of all, I should thank everyone that's organised these events. I think it's a fantastic effort that's been put in, and the points that have been made here are very, very, very sound indeed. it's a complex issue, energy. Clearly, it's a very complex issue. But there's one thing to me that occurs, and that is that we are a carbon-based life form. And yet, the whole carbon agenda seems to be to get rid of carbon. And I think Phil actually touched upon this briefly, and Rhys, of course, touched on it again as part of this kaleidoscope of forces that are acting in terms of energy policy. But I'd like to get a wee bit further information on why it is that energy policy has been determined on a basis of the idea that we have to get rid of CO2 in the atmosphere when it's only contributing 0.004% of that atmosphere, and where CO2 levels in the past geologically have actually been higher, and where the rise in temperature seems to be associated with other geological factors on the planet Earth.
Yeah, well, I'll start on that one. And one of those factors is the Milankovitch cycle, which is the tilt of the Earth. And over a period of time, parts of the world get hotter, parts get cooler because of the Milankovitch cycle. It's one of the many cycles that affect the very complex issue of climate change. But one of the jump out answers to that question for me is, what does everybody think is the most important greenhouse gas? What's the most influential greenhouse gas? Any guesses? Methane. Well, no. The biggest contributor to global warming is water vapor. It's called clouds. Okay, and the problem is all the models, the 50 or so models, all of which have been consistently wrong, incidentally, for decades, none of them take into consideration the influence of moisture, which is about 90 to 95% of climate change gases, of greenhouse gases. It is the biggest single contributing factor. And if you please research this, because it's been deliberately omitted, the effect that clouds have, you can feel it. When there's no clouds in the sky, it gets colder. When there's clouds, it gets warmer, right? Duh. And it's quite incredible. When you look at the scientific evidence behind this, again, I would go to Patrick Moore. There's a brilliant professor of Scots descent in, I can't remember which university in America, I forget his name, but if you do your research on that, that's one of the issues we're being lied to. And for me, carbon is CO2. There's so much CO2 on planet Earth. Are we contributing to it? Yes. Is the climate going to change anyway? Yes. Does what we do make a difference? I think a tiny difference. But I certainly don't advocate pollution, and I don't advocate unnecessary waste of energy. It's a valuable resource. I think we should be efficient with it, and I think we should be sensible about it. Over to you, Rhys.
No, I think you've covered a lot of it, Phil. I think a lot of this has come from the kind of popular groundswell. Over a period of years, people have become convinced that we need to do this. I think it's only when it's got more recently where we're trying to do a lot very quickly and we can't afford it that people have stood back and thought, oh, hang on a minute. Because renewable energy, it is homegrown, it is clean, CO2 does have an effect, we should try and do what we can. But I think we're getting into this law of diminishing returns, that to make a reasonable difference, which we've done, our emissions, they're all compared to 1990 levels in the legislation. We're already at 50% of that. And people haven't been moaning about renewables until relatively recently. So we have made some good inroads. But what we're trying to do now is the remaining 50% is going to be much, much harder, particularly with gas price being high. And it isn't just because gas price is high, but it's not helping. And also, we're trying to do it in a very much more accelerated timescale. And that has been done by, I believe, a misjudgment on the government's part that there's enough popular support to keep going. But economically and scientifically, it makes no sense at all.
Gentlemen here. Oh,
Sorry, the microphone.
Hi. First of all, your point about water vapour, is that not because of the massive deforestation that's happened worldwide, which has therefore released a huge amount of water into the system? And my second point is, well, question, do you think we can ever catch up with Norway? Today is Norwegian's constitution or independent state. Can we ever catch up?
Okay, I'll start on that one. On the greening and the deforestation, if you check satellite maps, it's actually getting greener as it gets warmer. If you look at what CO2, what people don't understand, again, scientifically, because who can be arsed? It's the same as economics of a country. Who can be bothered at the details? But just before the Industrial Revolution, the CO2, let's breathe, 440 parts of CO2, right, per cubic, per metric. And if you look at what humans have survived on and how much CO2 was in the atmosphere over time, you'll find that CO2 in fact, let's do a simpler one. How many people understand how greenhouses operate and the people that farm? When you heat a greenhouse, what do you do with the exhaust fumes? The CO2 is fed back in. Why? Photosynthesis, O-level chemistry. CO2 is critical in the generation of oxygen and plant growth. The tests, and just check this out again, you need CO2 for plants to grow faster and bigger. And it also affects crustaceans in the sea. Again, do your fact checking on this. But the point I'm making is, actually, since temperatures have risen a bit, and recently, particularly in India and China, there's more forestation. The actual planet is getting greener. It's getting greener. And one of the things is people thrive. It's about 440 parts. Traditionally, before the Industrial Revolution, it was down about just over the low 200s, because we can take records from ice cores, and you can go further back to rock cores and mud, etc. So we can go back historically to see what the CO2 levels were within the environment. But a human being is perfectly functioning. In a lecture theatre like this, it can rise to over 1,000 parts, okay? 1,100, 1,200 parts per cubic metre. When you're in a submarine, it can go up to about 5,000 parts. And human beings are still functioning. And you've got nuclear weapons there, so you don't want to be malfunctioning, right? So, and we'll stop that as well, incidentally, when we take control of our own destiny. But and the highest is in space capsules, where it's up to about 7,000, and human beings are still functioning. So why are we worried about going from 440 to 500 when plants grow faster? And the answer, so it's not down to deforestation. The Claire's climate, we've only got a recent, my son-in-law is a meteorologist. And he is more into climate change than I am. I mean, he understands more about it. But one thing he does concede is that cloud or water vapor have a massive impact on carbon capture, on carbon, the carbon story of CO2 being a menace than people admit, and it's not in most of the models. So the second point, can we catch up with Norway? Yes. Why? Well, the fund is about 1.7 trillion at the minute. It's sitting about 1.7 trillion. They have about 10 billion, 10 trillion, is it barrels? 10 billion barrels versus Earth 3.3. However, that doesn't include West Coast. We are not even halfway through the known reserves. And one of the reasons, and one of the reasons I know about this is, having been on this cause and this campaign like you guys, not as long as some of you good people, so hats off to those good people whose shoulders upon which we stand, and those that have gone before us as well. That's not to be forgotten. There was a friend of mine who was a lead engineer on a vessel, a drilling vessel, and it did at the estuary of the Clyde, there's a massive reserve. And how we test reserves in the oil industry, we tap into it and we measure the pressure differential. You take samples and see how much you know, how much sulphur's in it, whatever. But you measure the pressure differential over time. Normally it takes a day or two to figure it out. This tap was left in for a week and there was no discernible pressure differentiation, which means it's massive. And what have the Brits done? Submarines coming through there, don't touch. You can't touch this. Is that right? Aye, okay. So it's there, and there's also an argument about the geological formation of the rocks. There's nothing on the west coast. It's a lie. There's plenty. There's also a reserve of Cornwall, a small reserve of Cornwall. But really into the Rockall Basin, that's why the reporting is not honest, because they don't want to know just how rich we are. And we've all read the Macron report. Pass it on to your kids. So yeah, we can catch Norway. Anything?
No, that's it.
There's down the front as well.
Back in the day, a year or two ago, they said that we could set up a nationalised energy company in Scotland, and then very quickly we were told we didn't have the power in the Scotland Act because energy was reserved and so on. Meanwhile, Wales set up one in paper at least, but I have heard that it's not written in the Welsh Act that they should be banned from doing it the way they are in Scotland.
So,
if, whether that's true or not, you did say we could
it's cutting out.
Sorry, stand up. What?
It's cutting out. Sorry. It's the microphone. It's not
Okay.
just itself.
Yeah.
Is that better?
A wee bit further away, maybe.
Right, on the angle. Yes. They said we weren't allowed to set up a nationalised energy company in Scotland the way Wales has. Possibly because Wales doesn't have it written into its act. Can you still not hear me?
I just don't use it. We'll listen.
Just shout.
Hey!
It's all right, I can hear you.
Is that better? This wee thing.
Your
Okay.
shouting was perfect.
Yeah, your shouting's fine.
Yes, so Wales has done it. I have heard that they never bothered writing in such a limitation in the Welsh Act because they didn't have any energy that they coveted the way they do in Scotland. But
Just, yeah, I mean, I'm not close enough to the Scottish Government to know why they're not pursuing some of these things, but there are ourselves and there are other groups like the Commonweal, for example, have done a lot of work in this area to highlight to the Scottish Government that they actually can do these things. Now, my big question is why are they not using the planning lever to negotiate more? Because, as you're well aware, a lot of the assets that are getting plonked in Scotland are actually really for England. They're not for us. We're getting no value out of them at all. So why are we not using that as a lever? I don't know. The SNP seem to be quite well aligned with the Labour government. Why that is, only they know. But I think we should be doing more, and I and my colleagues are using forums like this to try and highlight the fact that the Scottish Government should be getting into these. I mean, the Isle of Egg is a fantastic example of a local scheme. That's an energy scheme. That's not banned. And you can actually scale that up through local authorities right up to, the only thing that Scotland cannot have is a national energy policy. So we can't have our own market. The Scottish Government cannot own wholesale electricity assets, but local authorities can. And why are we doing it? I mean, that's really why I'm raising the issue, for us to ask that question. Excellent. Sorry, what's your first name? Mary. Brilliant question, Mary. Thanks very much, and sorry for the technical minor glitch, no doubt, guys.
Try one at the front, we'll be able to hear him.
Yeah. And for me, there is nothing, in answer to your question, there's nothing to stop them from scuppering us. We need independence, nothing less, and because then we can implement a national initiative where we copy Norway, every barrel counts policy. And why that works is we should be looking at using Inconels and stainless steel to create a network around Scotland for gathering. It's much cheaper than the transfer and shipping. Norway have done it, and the difference between a stainless steel pipe that lasts 35 years, when you're putting, there's often rocks and minerals and shit going through these pipes, including acid, basically, so a lot of sulfur. So carbon steel pipes, 15 years, depends on how aggressive the well is or what you're transporting. These pipes last a lot less. Plus the direct current distribution network, basically a ring main around the coast would help, or into the fields. That would also help, and that's what we could do then. But we need to act, and I totally agree with Rhys, we need to act like we're independent. And because what will happen then, we need to do what we would do as an independent nation, and we force the hand of the oppressor so that people can see this. And that's why we need to do this. And because I am close, or was close to the Scottish Government, the answer to why they're not doing it is because they're a tool of the UK Government and completely infiltrated.
I think that was for you to say, Brad.
Okay, I'll see if this is working. Yeah, it sounds. I think we've got the knack. Maybe I'm a bit closer to the bit where the transmission's going to. But anyway, we've got. Just as I was getting going there. The gremlins. I tell you what, if I point it this way.
Just shout.
I'll speak normally. I'm speaking normally. I'm speaking. Oh, there. No. I'll just shout.
Hey!
pushed in there like battery farms and things like this to catch all this power that they're stealing from us under the guise of these bloody free ports everywhere. And where the free ports are, they have little satellite things so they can suck up more of the stuff that we're trying to provide and killing our employment laws and all this kind of thing. So, because the free ports team and Salvo as well, they've issued these letters to all the people that they've got stakeholders within these free ports and things to say that what you're buying from the British government is actually the property of the sovereign people of Scotland. So should we wait until all that infrastructure is built before we reverse the meters and then start charging them for the power produced in Scotland in a free independent country? Should we just wait until they build the infrastructure for us and say, oh wait a minute, no, that's ours. Here's the bit of paper to say that your free ports were a sham. Should we use that as plan A to then basically steal back what they've given us?
Take that, yeah.
Actually, could you present for the sake of the online watchers, repeat the questions so that they know what...
Yeah, no, it's a very good point because our mics seem to work. So if I just paraphrase what I think you've asked, what you're basically saying is rather than try and intercept what the UK government are foisting on us, wait until they've done it and then nick it, basically. That was in a relatively few words, but I think my great fear of where we're going is that by the time we get independence, it'll be a question of where do you want to go? Well, I wouldn't have started here. We might end up with a lot of infrastructure that is a pain. You know, battery fires are incredibly hard to put out. Fire brigade won't go near them. They're an eyesore. They're not that useful. So I think what I was trying to do is to say, right, what we need to do is what is Scotland's energy policy? If Scotland was independent today, what would we do? And to try and stop the UK going down what I think is this evangelical route of whatever's green and available on the market today, we'll have loads of it. And that's what they're doing. I mean, I sympathise with some of the people in south of England that are getting all these solar farms. I mean, what a pointless waste of time all of that is. And it's harming our food, it's harming our countryside. My fear is that Scotland will be covered in grid wind farms and batteries. And by the time you get ownership of it, that isn't really what you want. The fields will be depleted, you can't then go in and get them because they're all capped off or whatever. I'm not a believer in batteries. I think it's the quick solution. I don't think Miliband really cares about anything that goes on outside London. If he covers the countryside, well, who gives a shit? He doesn't like the countryside. I'm an orienteer. I love the countryside. I spend my life in it. And I do care about spoiling it. And I think some of the things that are going on, Scotland doesn't need and shouldn't want. And I think we go in a different direction. And that's even putting aside the fact that if you did then have an independence negotiation, because that's really what it'll be, you know, they'll want some trade-off for all this stuff that you didn't want in the first place. So I'd rather have ownership of it right now.
Yep, and following on with that one, because it's a good question, but my answer would be no. Again, I agree with Rhys here, because smart meters are not smart for us, they're smart for them. So, and the other thing is the contractual, as a contracts manager and dispute resolution expert, you do not want to have to fight the fight that Teesside's currently going on. I can't remember the name of the South American country that's trying to disengage. Honduras. The wrangle that's currently facing just now is
That's because they had...
Yeah, go on.
You mentioned letters that had been sent out by Salvo. Honduras never did that. And the wrangle they've got is a consequence of the contracts that had been signed by them were legitimate contracts. And so what Honduras is trying to do is get back the resources and the profits from these resources where a legitimate contract
Has been insisted.
Unlike what's 25% of Honduras'
But no, and the people are being screwed.
Yeah.
Honduras is trying to extract itself from the ISDS, which is the international court, so they won't be subject to.
Okay, so and this is all about reservation.
Think very carefully
Absolutely.
about joining the ISDS.
Yeah.
Probably shouldn't do it.
No, most of these institutions are corrupted and controlled by those who would keep us on our knees. And that's why we've got to reinvent them or clear them out and be careful. Not the EU, EFTA for sure, amongst other things. There's lots of different ways to do it. But from a contractual perspective, I would be very nervous about allowing these free port contracts to go into full fruition, because we need to get out of this as quickly as possible, because the deeper the deeper the hole we dig, the bigger ladder we need to get out.
That was the purpose of the letters, to inform them that
Reservation of rights.
resources that they would be exploiting actually belong to the people of Scotland, and a contract with the UK government would be illegitimate.
Yep. And thank God Salvo's doing something about it. Somebody's standing up for us and paying. And this is why these think tanks This is why SSRG, this is why Salvo, the people, I mean, it's some of the stuff you're going, what? I can't get my head around it, you know? But there's people in there that I trust, and thank God they're there. So, yeah, so it would be very interesting to find more about this, but no, we cannot allow them to dig their claws even deeper in. They'll just tear chunks of us away when we wrestle them free.
Thank you very much for both of you. Very insightful speeches. On your local heat and energy, that's a great thing. What sort of scale are we talking about? Are we talking local towns? You talked about local authorities.
Mm-hmm.
To do a local authority, that would be a huge power plant. Time scale and costs versus a normal build for a generating station. How does that compare, you know, on time scale and costs per megawatt hour?
The district heating scheme in Glasgow takes heat from the River Clyde.
Yes.
Lots of our cities are beside water. Water has a huge heat capacity. Even cold water can have energy extracted from it.
Yeah, and the chap who owns the company that runs that is a colleague of mine. So, in fact, he and I have got a podcast with Leslie Riddick on Monday to follow up a lot of these things, and he's joining it. And I've been around that scheme. So I think there's two things. New build is much, much easier than retrofit. Retrofit's incredibly difficult. So there are two things that are stopping us from doing it. The first one is electricity price, clearly. At the moment, the Glasgow scheme is only running at about a quarter of its capacity. It can't expand because the electricity price means the heat is more expensive than generating with a gas boiler. So people can't switch. So something needs to happen with that. As I mentioned, if we had a proper market here where people were remunerated at cost and not cost plus super profits because of the gas price, we would be able to afford it. I mean, the difference is huge. And Dave Pearson, who runs that facility, you can actually see Whiteley Wind Farm from the plant. Yet the power it generates has got to go all the way into this national market, get inflated in price by a factor of 3, and then come back across the river. I mean, it's lunacy. It just doesn't work. So the other thing that's stopping it is we live in a Western world of freedom of choice and privatised markets, unfortunately, or not, depending where you look at it. Because of that, for district heating to work, you have to remove that right. And we've tried, in fact, when I worked for SSE for many years, I tried 3 or 4 times to get district heating off the ground, and it wouldn't work for that reason. People want the right to switch and are very loath to go onto it. So the local authority needs the power to mandate to be able to do a whole area. And then it's more suitable for new build. But it can be built and rolled out relatively quickly.
Are the people in these local schemes not stakeholders in the schemes?
They can be. They're not at the moment, but they can be, yeah.
Would they not be taking the power that's generated locally and not part of the grid? Sorry. So if it's a local scheme for local people, would that not be a private electricity supply? And therefore not part of the pricing scheme for the UK?
It would be. But the issue with that is that this particular district heating is powered by, has got a backup powered by gas, but it's powered obviously by electricity. And the electricity price has to come from the grid. That is the current setup. So what you'd need to do is build your own generation and ring fence it. And that can happen, but the generator itself, if you're building a generator which is connected to the grid, if the market is twice the price, you're going to sell to market. That's just the way structurally it works. So it needs to be competitive.
This scheme, or these schemes, don't have their own source of energy, i.e.
It
like
doesn't.
a biomass or something like that.
Yeah.
You have to get oil or gas or something from from the grid.
You have to import it from the
Is
grid.
that not a weak
Yeah.
point, because that relies on Westminster to begin with?
Ex-
The idea that
exactly.
you're proposing
Yeah.
is to have security in Scotland, so therefore we produce our own sources of energy that we can then generate heat and power.
Exactly, and this is what I'm saying. If you took a municipal scheme or a local authority scheme, if you put a wind farm or a waste to energy or whatever it is, and ring fence that heating scheme, the Scottish Government could do that. And they could ignore the fact that the market is, you know, at the moment it's better, but in the future it might not be. They can ring fence that, put the capital in, and whatever the price is, but at least you're insulated from the market. But the government don't do it.
The whole point of having these small schemes with their own source of energy is that if there's a blackout or a brownout, you've got these multiple sources that can feed back into the grid. And that's what gives Scotland its security while still under Westminster. Because there's no point in talking about when we get our independence, because that could be years away. And we need to save the people today.
Yeah.
So these
Yeah.
schemes need to be very quick and very economical, and they need to have like biomass or waterfalls or whatever as a source of power.
I totally agree with you. And the only thing that's stopping it is the will to do it. And there'll be some capital insulation. So the Scottish Government's going to have to put some money into that, and obviously therein lies the rub as well. But there is nothing to stop them doing these things.
And it's working actually just now in the Czech Republic. And this is not a new concept. This is an old socialist concept. It's been done many, many times. And it's happening right now. Independence, of course, because you can control everything. The community, a sense of community as well would be good. But new build, what you could do is contractually set it up such that if you want to buy a subsidised property here, and that's where the money has to come in, that's the problem here. Who's paying for this? And you can create a setup. If you buy a house here, your rights for private options, you're buying into the community and you will share the community scheme. It can be done. It has been done. Absolutely. I'm behind it.
Yeah.
Great
The
idea.
Scandinavian model, all of these district heating networks are all municipality owned. That's the big difference. And here, because we have this fragmented, privatised setup, it just doesn't work. The government's got to step in and adopt the Scandinavian model, but it can do it. Under the existing act, it can do it.
You were mentioning in your talk, Greece. You were mentioning in your talk, Greece, about the additional gas-fired power stations that would be needed. Would that missing capacity be fillable by either geothermal or tidal generation?
Not easily. The requirement that it's trying to satisfy is you've got a period of time where the wind's going to drop and wind generation isn't coming onto the system. The thing with tidal is, yes, it's more predictable than wind, but it is on all the time. You can't hold it back and then have a big increase in power for a few days and then shut it down again. So a gas plant is perfect for that. The other thing that Scotland's lacking, as I mentioned, and this was a big factor in Spain, is it doesn't have a lot of inertia in the system. There's only one thermal power plant now in Scotland, which is at Peterhead. So we're totally reliant on England for inertia. And big rotating plant is what provides inertia. Renewables can't because they're asynchronous. So it would... Sorry? What would, sorry?
The tidal power would supply
Yes.
because it goes round up the west coast and right round the north.
It would.
It starts here
Yeah.
and it runs for hours all the way through. By the time it gets there, it's come through again.
Yeah, no, exactly. So that's not the product I was saying that we're weak on. It's this short-term backup, because we've got so much wind that we have this kind of feast and famine. And the thing with wave and tidal is well, it'll save us importing technology, which is why I'm a big fan of it, because we shouldn't just be paying the Chinese all this money. But we need big reserve plants, and really the gas plant is what provides that. But what I would do is I would take those out of the current market, because these are the people that are gouging the market, making super profits, because the market's in distress at that point. I would take them out and contract for them separately. So when you come on when I say, and you get a price that I know what it is, you can't come and hold me to ransom. That's the bit that's wrong with the market at the moment.
Yeah, and
but I think we need that. And the fact that, it runs on gas and gas price is high and all the rest of it, well, as Phil said a number of times, we've got loads of gas. We're not allowed to go drilling for it, for some reason.
And taking the Crown Estate back in, because we've got tidal research obviously up in the north of Scotland, and you've got one of the problems in tidal research that we had in the gap between, I think it was the Shetlands and the mainland, or no, it was the Orkneys and the mainland, is the tidal force is so strong, we can't anchor the tidal technology to the ground, because it just gets washed away all the time. That's one of the big problems. So and the big problem here is something called black start. When you've got an energy blackout, national, currently it's the UK, but as an independent Scotland, you need to be able to boost start it, and that ain't windmills. It's rotating equipment. It's the most expensive part of the technology that we put into processing. And offshore, for example, one of the biggest parts of a rig is power generation and the storage of equipment. It's all about weight and tonnage. So what you can do with DC power and networks of supply, of energy and resources and pipes to take the stuff away, is you can shrink rigs to be much less dangerous for the operators, much lighter, much more cost efficient. And because the rotating equipment is very expensive, and that is why when Germany did all its wind and failed to start all its coal-fired power stations, because when the wind dies down, 5 o'clock and Coronation Street's on or something like that, and everybody goes and puts their cup of tea on. Well, not me, but I heard that happens, and and there's a big demand, and it's like base load versus peak load. Touched on it. These are issues that only you need to invest in a power station that you can switch on and off when required.
Hello. First of all, I'd like to thank Rhys and Phil for passing on their experiences. Very interesting. My name is Neil Tye. I actually live in the Black Isle, although I was born in England and I had nothing to do with that process. But anyway, I'd like to talk basically about the bigger picture about Scottish independence and what it means for Scotland. We have a big problem in Scotland with our politics, our politicians effectively. And we have another problem, which is the education of the people. This is fundamental to gaining support for Liberation Scotland. We need to increase our current numbers. I'm a member of Liberation Scotland, and we've got about 18,000 members at the moment. We've got to go up into the hundreds of thousands. And education, for me, is fundamental. I spent 50 years in the offshore industry as a surveyor, engineer, all around the world, 26 countries, passing on Scottish knowledge, which I gained from all the fabrication yards around Scotland, and took that experience and education around the world. I set up schools, etc., for education. So I know what it's all about, but you go into the deeper section of it, which is very, very useful information. I've also writing a book about Gavin McCrone's
to be read.
It's an interesting read, but what it actually does, and I think everybody should get involved in knowing about it. I mean, it's a very deep 15-page memorandum, originally, I think, that McCrone wrote, and this expresses basically, or exposes, the UK government's total suppression of finances from the revenue of the UK Treasury to the Scottish Treasury. Both accounts actually are at the Bank of England. I don't know whether you know that, but anyway, that's that. But the people need to know about what's happening, and I think the only way to get through to politicians is through a People's Congress. The people have to be involved. Sorry. The people have to get involved with politics, and the National Congress of People allied to Parliament or bicameral Parliament is very useful. I'm going off a track here with respect to what you're discussing, but I think what's important, and my final part is that as an independent country, we will have financial power to do what we want with energy. And without that financial independent sovereignty of our own currency, we could create anything that we wished financially.
Agreed. Yeah, excellent, Neil. Yeah. I look forward to reading it when you finish, and we'll certainly promote it. But you're 100% right. I think I don't think there's many people in this room who would disagree. Education and the erosion. I mean, the reason Scotland achieved all it's achieved during the Scottish Enlightenment was because we understood that education was key. It's being deteriorated now as we go into decline. And at one point, I think we had 6 universities when England had 2, something like that. It was like quite remarkable for a very small country. And at that time, we were about 10% of the UK population. And here's the other thing, you know, we are inclusive. That's the great thing about it. The politicians, the problem with the politicians is when you get engaged into politics, I assumed that these leaders had this, were going to do what it said in the tin. We were going to free Scotland and nothing else mattered. When I got there, I found the black arts being practiced, and I found people jostling for position. You had Joanna Cherry down there, and there's some people who, like me, went down for less money, but to fight the cause. And Joanna was one, Philippa Whitford was one, and the idea is they set each other against. You set us all against each other, divide and conquer. The same rule that's been used to divide Scotland for centuries now. And what we've got, we went down and there was 5 people, before it was about 6 people before it, 56 turned up. And now as a project manager and contracts manager, I'm sitting there looking at how this has been managed, or in my view, mismanaged. I've got to trust them, it's not my area of expertise. But without doubt, the educated, the better educated the people. I keep going back to what George Carlin said, because he nailed it. I was asked in politics to answer what you're talking about, Neil, and encapsulate it in a 4.5 minute speech. I was asked, can you summarise what politics is all about in 5 minutes or less? I went, nope, but I know someone that can. His name is George Carlin, and it's called The American Dream, because you gotta be asleep to believe it. He nails it. You should check it out. You've got to check it out. It's exactly what you've said, except articulated. If you don't mind a wee bit of swearing, he absolutely sums up where we are and why independence is so important. And it's why we're all here today, to fight for that cause.
I'd just like to ask, should an independent Scotland have nuclear power stations?
I was wondering when that question would crop up, and it crops up every time. This is obviously quite a polarising issue. Even, I should caveat, even within Energy Scotland, it's fairly polarised. I'm from the nuclear industry originally, so I confess to being a bit partisan. I think from Scotland's point of view, there's a couple of things. Firstly, the debate is somewhat moot, because Scotland is not going to have the grid to put a nuclear power station in Scotland on top of all the renewables. We already generate, when the wind's blowing, we already generate more than the grid can cope with. I think that's a big issue. I mean, we're seeing that part of the UK wealth fund, whatever that manifests itself as, has been given to Iberdrola to get Scottish Power to build grid quicker which I think is criminal, really, that's going on. And that's because Miliband has dug himself into a hole by putting up wind farms faster than the grid's going up, and it's constrained and it's costing a lot of money. Even when that grid is in place, you know, Scotland will have, by that time, a massive amount of renewables, tens of gigawatts. And probably on the windier periods is going to be constrained. So putting a big nuke in it's an interesting kickabout story, but from a practical point of view, there probably isn't capacity for one, not a big one anyway. Whether you're into SMRs is another debate. I was involved, my latter stages of SSE, I was involved in a feasibility study to invest in an SMR. And I worked quite closely with Babcock and Rolls-Royce. So I'm pretty familiar with them. Again, I was put on the job because I was fairly partisan anyway. And I have my views on them. I think probably the bottom line is it will come down to public opinion and a political decision. I think the great strength of Scotland is it doesn't need to go there. So you can if you choose, but you don't need to. Whereas I think England has to. I don't think it's got any choice. It needs a massive amount of power, and it just does not have the renewable capacity to be able to supply it. And I put that up on my slide. Last year, Scotland generated 113% of what it used. Whereas if you look at the figures that are collected for the UK, it's 30%. It's very low. So I think England's doing this 30 years too late. I was involved in the original rollout of the PWR programme that started with Sizewell B and then got scrapped by Thatcher. I think that was a criminal mistake. But I think from a Scottish point of view, you don't need one. But if you want one, the SMRs are well worth having a look at.
Yep, and just on that, I actually agree. And this is maybe a wee bit controversial because I was involved in Hinkley Point and have been highly critical of it, particularly the strike price and what's happening there. It's also England's strategy to place nuclear reactors as far away as possible from large population areas, and that's why the nukes are just 45 miles west of Glasgow, and it's why they want to put nuclear plants in Scotland. SMRs are small modular reactors, and it's catching on all over the world. I'm not against modern nuclear energy. It is actually much safer and better than has been reported. The Japanese disaster, actually no one died of radiation poisoning. It was the tsunami that killed most of the people after it. But yeah, and obviously we saw what happened in Russia with Chernobyl. But going forward, it's a possibility, but I 100% agree with Rhys. We have no need for nuclear. England does. We've got pumped storage as well, which is another phenomenal. If you've got water in mountains, pumped storage is a great way to generate more electricity when you need it. You use the wind to pump the water back up for free, and when you need it, you open the floodgates and generate the power. That's certainly what we should be doing. That's what the Norwegians are doing, plenty of water, plenty of mountains, and sell our oil to the rest of the world. The other thing is, I was on the Public Accounts Committee. I was lead rapporteur when I was there for most of the time because I was the only one on the committee with any commercial background in terms of what contracts the government had entered into. And one of the ones was like a 90 million barracks that was spent to a private company, and I just got ripped right into the chief executive, I think it was Caroline or something, who made 50% profit on a public expense project, right? And this is typical kind of con. So when I look at this in terms of our politicians, I think in England, yes, we don't need it, but in the audit I did on Sellafield, that is legacy when we were trying to catch up our nuclear programme in the 50s and the 60s, and the waste that was created then is still, there's two of the most dangerous buildings in the world at Sellafield. They're open. The waste is contained in oil barrels sitting submerged in water. A seagull comes in, flies out, shakes a bit, and then just drops to the ground, right? You cannot go near it. But what we're doing is processing this stuff now. And actually with modern nuclear reactors, you can actually use the old fuel with, you know, because the half-life of some of this fuel is incredible.
Years, yeah.
And the British government, and one of the things I was auditing was, why is the British people spending $1 billion a year to clean up the mess in Sellafield? We don't have to do that again. Thank God it's done. The technology is already there. So nuclear is not to be feared unless it's in a weapon. You know, but you need to protect it, because, and that's the only thing I've got about the small modular reactors, is when you've got one big unit, you can protect it and you can focus on protecting it. Look at what Ukraine's trying to do in the war with the Russians and the Ukrainians. If a terrorist wants to make a mess, you attack a nuclear reactor, and that's the big problem I have with nuclear. So I would say, since we don't need it, nuclear-free Scotland. I don't know much about it. Did you go?
Yeah, not an awful lot more. I mean, the advantage of thorium, it doesn't have a lot of the high half-life radionuclides coming out of it. Yeah, I looked into not thorium, but I certainly looked into the CANDU. The CANDU reactor is quite a neat design as well, because it doesn't have all the big high pressure parts and all the rest of it. Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I mean, thorium reactors are a pretty neat idea. The one possible issue with them is thorium needs to be manufactured. So you'd have all that kind of infrastructure that you'd need, because you can't dig up thorium. You have to make it, which generally involves a nuclear reactor. Yeah.
Well,
so you probably know more about it than I do, but yeah, I can see the advantages of it, but we're kind of cutting new ground. But then Scotland's been there already, because we had the fast reactor at Dunfermline, which was groundbreaking at the time. In fact, when I first started in the nuclear industry, my boss was ex-Dunfermline, one of the ops guys there. You know, a fast reactor that was sodium cooled was groundbreaking and massively efficient. And again, that's been stopped. So again, it's a political decision. A lot of the expertise, unfortunately, will have left by then. I mentioned that I'm from West Cumbria. I actually worked at Sellafield, so I'm quite familiar with it. My dad spent his career there. I worked at the power station at Calder Hall, so I'm fairly familiar with it. So there is a lot goes with it, but I think from Scotland's point of view, that ship has almost sailed. You know, the expertise has probably gone, but it had a fantastic heritage. I worked between Calder Hall and Chapel Cross because they're sisters of each other, so I was shuttling up and down the road a lot, and see a lot of expertise in Chapel Cross as well, and in Dunfermline and across the AGRs. But that ship's possibly sailed.
Politically, I would certainly invest in research and development funding for something like thorium, because it sounds to me, and I'm sure most people in the room, that would allow us to boldly go where no man has gone before. This is a Star Trek thing. It's got to be. That's the reactor they're going to use. And if your dilithium crystals are osmoregulating with your antimatter pods, I know you're in trouble. That's all I know.
One last point on the modular reactors, because it's something I get thrown at me that, oh, this is new technology and experimental. The Babcock reactor that I was working with, Babcock on a civilian version of it, every US aircraft carrier is powered by that reactor and has been since the 1960s. So it's tried and tested. I mean, if they'd had an accident, we probably wouldn't hear about it. But so I'm not aware of one. But it is a tried and tested reactor.
In the decommissioned aircraft carriers,
Right.
And that's the problem.
Yeah.
It's not just, oh, you've got good electricity. It's very bloody expensive electricity to begin with. It takes forever to produce relative to its size and what it produces. And then you've got eons of stories that you've talked about dead seagulls. Why the hell would we have it?
Got a question here?
Yes, very interesting, and I'm very, very heartened to see that there are possible energy strategies to be taken up after independence. I am no expert on energy. All I know is I want independence. So whilst we can have an energy strategy and independence will facilitate that, how can the energy strategy facilitate independence? Like, what education, what's the first step? See, getting to what you're describing and all the things that the government aren't doing and these possible solutions, what then is the first step that we should take so that we can take a very simple message out to the people of Scotland so that we can say, because this is a very complex issue. I've got a next door neighbour who I love dearly, but he's a nationalist and he's not the brightest. I'm not going to be able to tell him this. What's the first thing I say we need to do so that I am now helping forward the cause of independence? How do I become the independentist I want to be with this information?
I think it's all about, yeah, very good question, but I think it's all about the possibilities, explaining the possibilities, because you cannot generate an energy protocol and strategy that will gain us independence. It's part of the story of Scotland's potential and what we have done and what we can do. For me, the politicians need to be forced to bend to the will of the Scottish people. And the problem that we face right now, the knowledge and experience in all of the disciplines within Scotland, any good idea is pushed down because the political gamesmanship that the leaders of certainly the SNP at the moment, they're suppressing all of the great ideas that Salvo are pulling out of the hat, SSRG, ALAPA, ISP, all of the many, many movements that need to unite. And the hardest ones to persuade, this is why, one of the reasons I skipped Prism today was to come here, because this matters. The people that here matter, because we are the pilot light, and if we can show unification, and it's about backing a cause. It's unification and backing a cause. And even though the military section of the white paper was drafted, if you remember Scotland's Future, massive tome, it should not have been necessary, and nobody read it, right? But the military section of it was drafted in my dining room in a house in Royal Deeside, a hunting lodge, when I was working for Shell at the time, BP and Shell. And I had two military friends of mine, full colonel, British Army, independentista. There was Clausewitz, military strategist. There was Angus Robertson, I talked about earlier, and Luke Skipper, who was the SNP chief of staff at the time. And I said, my contribution at the start of this process was, how would you like your steak done? Right? Because right, these are like senior officers, and they knew what they were talking about. And the draft that was drafted eventually turned up in there, but there was lots of contributors. But the point made to me at the time by Angus Robertson, amongst other curious points, was, yeah, we'd like to see these guys, but we don't know if they're working for them. Little did I know that Angus Robertson was working for them. And that's the thing. That's our biggest obstacle. Because when I think back at that, and these guys are putting their careers on the line for a cause. Angus will always put his career ahead of any cause. And I considered him a friend, and he's a very smart, intelligent guy, but they've got something on him because he's not acting. To say that we should have a referendum and use the same mandate that we were presented in 2014 is a sellout, a disgrace, and the mark of a traitor, in my view. And so yeah, it's a fascinating opportunity we have, but the only way we can gain it is by illustrating, by being tolerant, unified, not rising to the bait. Let's bury some hatchets, be less judgmental, be positive, and everybody should read the wee blue book, reissue them and distribute them everywhere. Education, education, education.
Okay.
I think, yeah, the key thing for me, I think, is the way I finished my presentation, which is Westminster energy policy is not fit for purpose for Scotland anymore. Now, we used to be quite well aligned, and we're not now. We're materially different. And I think the key things to that are that you know, the UK government is paying tens of billions of pounds to the French state to develop nuclear that we don't need, but we're paying for it because we're part of the same market. They're putting batteries everywhere and grid everywhere to get the power from Scotland to England, but we don't need to do that. They're stopping us drilling for oil and gas, where we've got loads of it that we could use. And this thing about, you know, oh, gas price is high, that's all tragic. If we were generating the gas, even though it's an international gas market, you would be taking revenue from that you could recycle into discounting bills. And that's what the French are doing, because the nuclear doesn't cost any more. Yet it's being traded in a European market that EDF are getting twice what they were. So the French state are taking that off the top and discounting consumer bills with it. We could be doing that with oil and gas, but we can't. So we've got enough renewables that we need. We've got the opportunity for oil and gas revenue that we're not allowed access to. A lot of the stuff that we're being forced to do, for want of a better word, is all to service England. You know, John Swinney could have turned around and said, right, you're not getting planning permission for our end of these interconnectors unless you give me X, Y, and Z. You know, why didn't you do that? I don't know. It was nodded through. We mentioned free ports before. In fact, a lot of these battery farms are, it's not just free ports. The planning consent for these huge battery farms is just getting nodded through by Scottish government. They don't have to do that. You know, they could stop Miliband in his tracks if they wanted to, because Miliband cannot deliver without Scotland, and he's pinned his career on it. We have a huge negotiating position. Sorry? Yeah, exactly. So we have a huge negotiating position that we're not using. So that's a slight aside. But I think the key thing in terms of independence is, from an energy point of view, we used to be fairly well aligned with the UK. We had the same mix, the same kind of issues. They had nukes, we had nukes. They had coal, we had coal. That is no longer the case. We are totally different. We need an energy policy that's totally different.
We need to wrap this up pretty soon, but I didn't see any hands up, so I'd just like to get each of you to kind of conclude. You know, what are your kind of thoughts? You know, and what do you think should be the next step forward? Because we'll be talking about that on Sunday. How do you?
Okay. You go.
Sure. For me, Scotland's potential is well known, very well known by those who pay attention. And we touched on education, we touched on awareness, we touched on community. Where's that sense of community? When I was growing up, you didn't have to lock your back door. And one of it is down to the fact that the wealth, the distribution of wealth has created very much in us and them. Poverty is the enemy of us, of the people. And we're being forced into it by the actions of billionaires who don't give a damn about us, who control the politicians, who control the institutions. The people who really control what's going on are very, very difficult to fight. But what they fear, what terrifies them, is what they saw in 2014 with the Yes movement. A mass movement unified against one cause. Every discipline, every house, the left, the centre, the right. I did work with Michael Fry. I set up a meeting in Aberdeenshire with Michael Fry and his movement. It was like Labour for Indy, Lib Dems for Indy, reached out to them all. And there was a lot of, we're not talking to them, the People's Popular Front of Judea. We're not going to talk to them. And I thought, you got it, man. This is about for Scotland, for all of us. And unification, I think, if there's a one-word answer to your question, sir, it's unification. Unification behind a cause to take independence, to make the country that we need and want to live in. To get the kids involved in it, to get them involved with reading the wee blue book. Be aware of facts. Don't rise to the bait. Be tolerant. Be kind. But by God, get your point over. And know your facts. And fact-check things as well. I mean, we're prone to do it. Certainly with this thing that we do, this PRISM programme, we try to be careful, but sometimes you just go off on one and you think, well, rage against the machine. But that's what it is. Anger is an energy. Control it. Don't lash out at people. There's people who I've wronged, and I will apologise for, and I will do not anything. Well, maybe let's think about it for the cause, to make sure that we get the future that we deserve. But an understanding of what can be and can only be through the actions of us as a collective and working with the skills that everybody has. For example, Salvo have skills, SSRG have skills. Let's get behind Liberate Scotland. Let's make sure, and liberation are different, you know. Let's get behind a cause where there's enough people that, for example, I'm looking at some of the funding here, and it's better than the SNP have or Alapa have. If Alapa are smart, they'll get on board. They might be leaving it too late. I don't know. There's still people in SNP I like and trust. There's many people in Alaba I like and trust. But the mechanism of a political party and the dark arts is very off-putting for those of us who are principled and come into this with good intentions and a true heart, because sometimes you've got to fight fire with fire. And it's the Department of the Dark Arts is maybe not everybody's in Slytherin, right? It's just how it works. But you have to understand it's part of the game, because by God it's been marshalled against us in a way that's only ramping up. When the IRA were the biggest threat to the Union, the British establishment infiltrated. How easy is it to get into the SNP and Alapa and anybody else that stands in their way? So yeah, unification on a cause. Don't rise to the bait, and be good to thy neighbour.
Okay. Rhys, if you could have the final one.
Yeah, I think the key takeaway from me is that the energy policy that's coming out of Westminster, whether or not you believe the climate change, their energy policy is not just not acting in Scotland's best interests, it's actually doing the exact opposite. It's actively acting against Scotland's best interests, where our natural resources we're not allowed to go and capture, and yet we're forced to build loads of technology that's imported from abroad, that'll make profits that are exported abroad, and they'll generate electricity which is sent to England. Yet we're taking all the downside of it in terms of visual intrusion and the harm on our landscape, and getting absolutely no value from it. And for me, we've got to try and put the brakes on this. And I don't understand why we're not doing it already. But the energy policy that we need to adopt is going to be materially different from the one they've got in England. The market doesn't work. The technology mix is wrong. Moaning about gas price, yet importing 40% of your energy is insane. Banning drilling because the Climate Change Act only measures emissions within our own sovereign borders, even if they go up on a global sense. And I thought global climate change was what it was all about, but obviously not. It's okay to ship this stuff halfway around the world. We're paying 25 billion a year to Norway to import oil and gas that we've got access to from the same place they've got access to it. I mean, the whole thing's insane. And the sooner we stop that and implement something that works for us, the better.
Okay. Okay, well, on that positive note, I would like to ask you to give us, our guests, a warm round of applause for their very substantive.
Thank you.
You guys are Led Zeppelin, man. Okay, thank you everybody for coming, and we really appreciate it. And thank both of you for such a lovely, substantive.
Thanks very much.
David, thank you.
Yeah, it's great to meet you, Phil. Yeah, absolutely.
Man, how you do?
Absolutely.
Yeah.